In the quiet countryside of Surrey, England, stands a 72-room Tudor mansion known as Sutton Place. To the passing stranger, it is a monument to success, a palace of gold, art and history. But for those who lived within its walls, it was something else entirely. It was a gilded cage. This was the home of John Paul Getty. In 1966, the Guinness Book of World Records named him the richest private citizen on Earth. At a time when the world was changing, Getty sat atop an empire of oil worth billions. He was a man who could buy anything, and anyone. But as the world looked on in envy, a dark shadow was beginning to stretch over the Getty name, a shadow that would eventually swallow his children, his grandchildren, and his soul. There is a story told by guests who visited Sutton Place. Amidst the Renaissance paintings and the billionaire's priceless statues, there sat a public payphone. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't an antique. It was a fully functional coin-operated telephone. J. Paul Getty, the man who owned the very fuel that powered the planet, was so terrified of his guests and staff using his phone for long-distance calls that he forced them to pay for every minute, even his own family. This was the man who held the purse strings of a dynasty, a man who measured love in cents and loyalty in barrels of crude oil. But where did this obsession begin? Was he born with this coldness in his veins, or was it forged in the dust of the oil fields? To understand the tragedy that follows, we must first understand the man who built the mountain of gold. Born in 1892, Paul Getty was the son of George Getty, a successful lawyer turned oil man. But Paul wasn't content with his father's success. He wanted more. He wanted it all. By the age of 24, he had made his first million. But the millions were never enough to fill the void. He was a man driven by a singular, haunting ambition, to become the richest man to ever live. But as his bank account grew, his world shrank. He married 5 times, and 5 times he walked away. He had children he barely knew, and a father who, even on his deathbed, told Paul he would eventually ruin the family business. Perhaps that was the spark. Perhaps the Getty curse wasn't something supernatural. Perhaps it was a father's prophecy manifesting in the cold, hard heart of a billionaire. Black gold in the desert. In 1949, the world's biggest oil companies looked at a barren stretch of sand between Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and saw nothing. They called it the neutral zone. To them, it was a wasteland, unproductive and a waste of investment. But J. Paul Getty saw something they didn't. Or perhaps he was simply willing to gamble more than anyone else. Getty took a massive risk. He signed a 60-year concession, paying $9.5 million up front, a staggering amount at the time, plus a minimum of $1 million a year, even if he never found a single drop of oil. For 4 years, he poured money into the desert. 4 years of drilling, sweating, and failing. His critics laughed. They called it Getty's folly. Then, in 1953, the earth cracked open. Black gold erupted from the sand. Getty hadn't just found oil, he had discovered an ocean of it. This single gamble transformed him from a wealthy American businessman into a global sovereign. He wasn't just rich anymore, he was a man who held the keys to the world's energy. By the late 1950s, Fortune magazine officially crowned him the richest man in America. But while his tankers crossed the oceans and his refineries burned day and night, Getty was becoming a ghost in his own life. He developed a paralyzing fear of flying. He refused to return to America, living instead in European luxury hotels, obsessed with the fluctuating numbers on his balance sheets. He was a billionaire who lived out of suitcases. He spoke several languages, collected ancient Roman statues, and could negotiate with kings. But he couldn't negotiate with his own heart. While he was conquering the Middle East, he was losing his grip on his family. His 5 sons were growing up in his shadow, a shadow so large it blocked out the sun. To Getty, his sons weren't just heirs, they were employees, potential rivals. He graded their letters for grammar and returned them with corrections instead of affection. He was building an empire that would last 1,000 years, but he was failing to build a home. The oil was flowing, the money was piling up to the heavens, but the foundation of the Getty dynasty was already starting to crack. Because as Paul Getty would soon learn, black gold has a way of staining everything it touches, and the price of being the richest man in the world was about to be paid, by his own flesh and blood. 5 wives, 0 love. J. Paul Getty once said, "A lasting relationship with a woman is only possible if you are a business failure." It was a philosophy he lived by with brutal consistency. He conquered the oil markets of the world, but the one thing he could never master was love. By the time he reached the peak of his power, Getty had been married and divorced 5 times. To him, wives were like old cars, valuable for a time, but easily replaced by a newer model. His first wife was only 18 when they married. His last was a starlet. But regardless of their age or background, they all shared the same fate. They were neglected, overshadowed by the true love of Getty's life, his balance sheets. He didn't want partners, he wanted trophies. And once the trophy lost its shine, he moved on. He was rarely present for the births of his children. While his wives were raising his heirs, Getty was thousands of miles away, negotiating contracts in hotels or hiding in his office. He viewed emotions as a weakness, a distraction from the pursuit of capital. But this emotional absence would leave a hollow core in the hearts of his 5 sons: George, Jean Ronald, Eugene, Gordon, and Timothy. The true depth of Getty's coldness was revealed in the story of his youngest son, Timothy. Timmy was born with a brain tumor. For years, the boy fought for his life, undergoing surgery after surgery. He went blind. He suffered in ways a child never should. And where was the world's richest father? He was in Europe, refusing to return to America to see his dying son. Getty complained about the medical bills. He wrote letters to the boy's mother, not with words of comfort, but with complaints about the costs of Timmy's treatment. When Timothy died at the age of 12, Getty didn't even attend the funeral. He stayed in his mansion, obsessed with his work, claiming he was too busy. It was a moment that defined the Getty legacy. A father who had all the money in the world, but couldn't spare a single tear for his own child. The wives eventually left, taking their broken hearts with them. But the children were left behind, trapped in the orbit of a man who treated them like bad investments. They grew up in luxury, but they were starving for the one thing Getty refused to give: a father's approval. And as these boys grew into men, the Getty curse would stop being a theory and start becoming a body count. Because the sons of the richest man in the world were about to find out that inheriting $1 billion is often a death sentence. The tragic sons. To the public, the Getty sons were the luckiest men alive. They were the princes of oil, the heirs to a throne made of black gold. But inside the dynasty, they were competing for the affection of a man who didn't know how to give it. J. Paul Getty didn't raise sons, he raised shadows, and one by one, those shadows began to flicker and go out. First there was George, the golden boy, the eldest son who tried the hardest to please his father. He worked tirelessly in the family business, hoping that one day his father would say the words, "I'm proud of you." But those words never came. In 1973, the pressure became too much. George was found dead in his home. The cause? A cocktail of drugs and alcohol. Some called it an accident. Others knew it was the weight of the Getty name finally crushing him. Then there was Eugene, better known as J. Paul Getty Jr. He tried to escape the corporate world by diving into the counterculture of the 1960s. He moved to Rome, surrounded himself with artists and rock stars. But the curse followed him. His wife, Talitha, a style icon of the era, died of a heroin overdose in their apartment. Broken by guilt and grief, Getty Jr. became a recluse, hiding from the world in a London basement for years, paralysed by the very fortune that was supposed to set him free. The other brothers fared no better. Gordon Getty, though successful in music, lived under the constant scrutiny of his father's lawyers. Jean Ronald was largely ignored, cut out of the primary inheritance. It seemed that every Getty son was paying a tax, not in money, but in mental health, addiction, and tragedy. The family tree was rotting from the top down. And what was the patriarch doing while his children were falling apart? He was still at Sutton Place, counting his dividends. He expressed more emotion over the price of a stolen painting than the death of his own son. He remained convinced that his hardness was a virtue, that his coldness was what made the empire strong. But the universe wasn't done with the Gettys yet. If the deaths of his children didn't break J. Paul Getty's heart of stone, the world was about to see what would happen when the curse moved to the next generation. Because in 1973, the same year George died, a phone call would come from Italy. A call that would force the world's richest man to put a price on his grandson's life. The ear in the mail. July 10th, 1973. In the heart of Rome, a 16-year-old boy named John Paul Getty III was walking home. He was the grandson of the richest man on earth. To the Italian mafia, specifically the 'Ndrangheta, he wasn't a boy, he was a $17 million jackpot. They snatched him off the street, bundled him into a car, and disappeared into the mountains of Calabria. The kidnappers sent a note. They wanted $17 million for his safe return. Any other billionaire grandfather would have paid it in an hour. But J. Paul Getty was not like any other man. When the press asked him if he would pay the ransom, he looked into the cameras with ice in his eyes and said, "I have 14 other grandchildren. If I pay 1 penny now, I'll have 14 kidnapped grandchildren." For 5 months, the boy was kept in a hole in the ground. 5 months of silence from his grandfather. The boy's mother, Gail, begged the old man for the money. She was met with cold corporate logic. Getty wasn't negotiating for a life, he was negotiating a business deal. But the kidnappers were losing patience. In November, a package arrived at a local newspaper office. Inside was a lock of hair and a human ear. It belonged to the 16-year-old Paul. The message was clear: pay, or he comes back in pieces. Only then, after seeing his grandson's flesh in the mail, did Getty agree to pay. But even then, he did it like a shark. The final ransom was $2.9 million, but Getty only paid $2.2 million, the maximum amount that was tax-deductible. The remaining $700,000? He lent it to his own son, the boy's father, at 4% interest. Even in the face of his grandson's mutilation, J. Paul Getty made sure he turned it into a profitable loan. The boy came home, but the soul was gone. The Getty curse had claimed its youngest victim yet. And as the old man sat in his mansion, satisfied with his negotiation, he didn't realize that he had just signed the death warrant of his own legacy. The legacy of misery. In June 1976, at the age of 83, the richest man in the world finally met a force he couldn't negotiate with: death. J. Paul Getty died in his 72-room mansion, surrounded by priceless statues and silent hallways. He left behind a fortune worth billions, but as his body was lowered into the ground, it was clear that he had died a pauper in spirit. He had all the oil in the world, but not enough warmth to keep his own family from freezing. But the death of the patriarch didn't end the tragedy. For the Getty family, the money was a virus that continued to spread. Paul Getty III, the boy who lost his ear, never recovered from the trauma. He spiraled into a life of addiction, eventually suffering a massive stroke that left him paralyzed and nearly blind for the rest of his life. He died at 54, a ghost of the boy who was once a pawn in his grandfather's games. Today, the Getty name is mostly known for the magnificent Getty Museum in Los Angeles. It is a place of beauty, culture, and education, funded by the very oil that caused so much pain. It is the ultimate irony. The world gets the art, but the family got the scars. The Getty fortune, once a symbol of ultimate success, is now a case study in the destructive power of wealth without humanity. We are taught to chase the dream, to build empires, to become titans. But the story of the Gettys reminds us of a chilling truth, that money is just a tool, and in the hands of a man who values coins over kin, it becomes a weapon. J. Paul Getty built a mountain of gold, but he died at the bottom of it, alone. Perhaps the true Getty curse wasn't fate. Perhaps it was simply the choice of a man who knew the price of everything, but the value of nothing. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and stay with us, because behind every fortune, there is a story rarely told.